We have been a misunderstood and badly mocked org for a long time. Like when we started, we announced the org at the end of 2015 and said we were going to work on AGI. Like people thought we were batshit insane.
Yeah.
I remember at the time a eminent AI scientist at a large industrial AI lab was DMing individual reporters being these people aren't very good and it's ridiculous to talk about AGI and I can't believe you're giving them time of day. And it's that was the level of pettiness and rancor in the field at a new group of people saying we're going to try to build AGI.
So OpenAI and DeepMind was a small collection of folks who were brave enough to talk about AGI in the face of mockery.
We don't get mocked as much now.
High level, what is GPT-4? How does it work and what to you is most amazing about it?
It's a system that we'll look back at and say was a very early AI. And it's slow, it's buggy, it doesn't do a lot of things very well, but neither did the very earliest computers. And they still pointed a path to something that was going to be really important in our lives, even though it took a few decades to evolve.
Do you think this is a pivotal moment? Out of all the versions of GPT 50 years from now, when they look back at an early system that was really kind of a leap, in a Wikipedia page about the history of artificial intelligence, which of the GPTs would they put?
That is a good question. I sort of think of progress as this continual exponential. It's not like we could say here was the moment where AI went from not happening to happening. And I'd have a very hard time pinpointing a single thing. I think it's this very continual curve. Will the history books write about GPT 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 7? That's for them to decide. I don't really know. I think if I had to pick some moment from what we've seen so far, I'd sort of pick ChatGPT. It wasn't the underlying model that mattered. It was the usability of it, both the RLHF and the interface to it.
What is ChatGPT? What is RLHF? Reinforcement learning with human feedback. What was that little magic ingredient to the dish that made it so much more delicious?
So we trained these models on a lot of text data. And in that process, they learn the underlying something about the underlying representations of what's in here or in there. And they can do amazing things. But when you first play with that base model that we call it after you finish training, it can do very well on evals. It can pass tests. It can do a lot of, there's knowledge in there. But it's not very useful, or at least it's not easy to use, let's say. And RLHF is how we take some human feedback. The simplest version of this is show two outputs, ask which one is better than the other, which one the human raters prefer, and then feed that back into the model with reinforcement learning. And that process works remarkably well with, in my opinion, remarkably little data to make the model more useful. So RLHF is how we align the model to what humans want it to do.
So there's a giant language model that's trained on a giant data set to create this kind of background wisdom knowledge that's contained within the internet. And then somehow adding a little bit of human guidance on top of it through this process makes it seem so much more awesome.
Maybe just because it's much easier to use. It's much easier to get what you want. You get it right more often the first time, and ease of use matters a lot, even if the base capability was there before.
And a feeling like it understood the question you were asking, or it feels like you're kind of on the same page.
It's trying to help you.
It's the feeling of alignment.
Yes.
I mean, that could be a more technical term for it. And you're saying that not much data is required for that. Not much human supervision is required for that.
To be fair, we understand the science of this part at a much earlier stage than we do the science of creating these large pre-trained models in the first place. But yes, less data, much less data.
That's so interesting. The science of human guidance. That's a very interesting science. And it's going to be a very important science to understand how to make it usable, how to make it wise, how to make it ethical, how to make it aligned in terms of all the kind of stuff we think about. And it matters which are the humans and what is the process of incorporating that human feedback, and what are you asking the humans? Is it two things? Are you asking them to rank things? What aspects are you or asking the humans to focus in on? It's really fascinating. But what is the data set it's trained on? Can you kind of loosely speak to the enormity of this data set?
The pre-training data set?
The pre-training data set, I apologize.
We spend a huge amount of effort pulling that together from many different sources. There are open source databases of information. We get stuff via partnerships. There's things on the internet. It's a lot of our work is building a great data set.
How much of it is the memes subreddit?
Not very much. Maybe it'd be more fun if it were more.
So some of it is Reddit, some of it is news sources, all like a huge number of newspapers. There's like the general web.
There's a lot of content in the world, more than I think most people think.
Yeah, there is. Like too much. Where like the task is not to find stuff, but to filter out stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there a magic to that? Because there seems to be several components to solve. The design of you could say, algorithms, so like the architecture of the neural networks, maybe the size of the neural network. There's the selection of the data. There's the human supervised aspect of it with, RL with human feedback.
Yeah, I think one thing that is not that well understood about creation of this final product, like what it takes to make GPT-4, the version of it we actually ship out and that you get to use inside of ChatGPT, the number of pieces that have to all come together, and then we have to figure out either new ideas or just execute existing ideas really well at every stage of this pipeline. There's quite a lot that goes into it.
So there's a lot of problem solving. Like you've already said for GPT-4 in the blog post and in general, there's already kind of a maturity that's happening on some of these steps, like being able to predict before doing the full training of how the model will behave.
Isn't that so remarkable, by the way, that there's like a law of science that lets you predict for these inputs, here's what's going to come out the other end. Like, here's the level of intelligence you can expect.
Is it close to a science, or is it still, because you said the word law and science, which are very ambitious terms.
Close to, I say.
Close to, right. Let's be accurate, yes.
I'll say it's way more scientific than I ever would have dared to imagine.
So you can really know the peculiar characteristics of the fully trained system from just a little bit of training.
Like any new branch of science, we're going to discover new things that don't fit the data and have to come up with better explanations. And, that is the ongoing process of discovery in science. But with what we know now, even what we had in that GPT-4 blog post, like, I think we should all just like be in awe of how amazing it is that we can even predict to this current level.
Yeah. You can look at a 1-year-old baby and predict how it's going to do on the SATs. I don't know. Seemingly an equivalent one. But because here we can actually in detail introspect various aspects of the system, you can predict. That said, just to jump around, you said the language model that is GPT-4, it learns, in quotes, something. In terms of science and art and so on, is there within OpenAI, within like folks like yourself and Ilyas Eskever and the engineers, a deeper and deeper understanding of what that something is? Or is it still a kind of beautiful, magical mystery?
Well, there's all these different evals that we could talk about. And
what's an eval?
Oh, like how we measure a model as we're training it after we've trained it, and say like, how good is this at some set of tasks?
And also, just on a small tangent, thank you for sort of open sourcing the evaluation process.
Yeah. I think that'll be really helpful. But the one that really matters is, we pour all of this effort and money and time into this thing, and then what it comes out with, like, how useful is that to people? How much delight does that bring people? How much does that help them create a much better world, new science, new products, new services, whatever? And that's the one that matters. And understanding for a particular set of inputs, like how much value and utility to provide to people, I think we are understanding that better. Do we understand everything about why the model does one thing and not one other thing? Certainly not always. But I would say we are pushing back like the fog of war more and more. And we are, it took a lot of understanding to make GPT-4, for example.
But I'm not even sure we can ever fully understand. Like you said, you would understand by asking it questions, essentially, because it's compressing all of the web, like a huge swath of the web, into a small number of parameters, into one organized black box that is human wisdom. What is that?
Human knowledge, let's say.
Human knowledge. It's a good difference. Is there a difference between knowledge? So there's facts and there's wisdom. And I feel like GPT-4 can be also full of wisdom. What's the leap from facts to wisdom?
A funny thing about the way we're training these models is I suspect too much of the processing power, for lack of a better word, is going into using the model as a database instead of using the model as a reasoning engine.
Yeah.
The thing that's really amazing about this system is that it, for some definition of reasoning, and we could of course quibble about it, and there's plenty for which definitions this wouldn't be accurate, but for some definition, it can do some kind of reasoning. And, maybe the scholars and the experts and the armchair quarterbacks on Twitter would say, no, it can't, you're misusing the word, you're, whatever. But I think most people who have used the system would say, okay, it's doing something in this direction. And I think that's remarkable and the thing that's most exciting. And somehow out of ingesting human knowledge, it's coming up with this reasoning capability, however we want to talk about that. Now, in some senses, I think that will be additive to human wisdom. And in some other senses, you can use GPT-4 for all kinds of things and say that it appears that there's no wisdom in here whatsoever.
Let me ask you the all-important question about size. So does size matter in terms of neural networks with how good the system performs? So GPT-3, 3.5 had 175 billion.
I heard GPT-4 had 100 trillion.
100 trillion. Can I speak to this? Do you know that meme?
Yeah, the big purple circle.
Do you know where it originated?
I don't. Do you? I'd be curious to hear.
It's the presentation I gave.
No way.
Yeah. Journalists just took a snapshot. Now I learned from this. It's right when GPT-3 was released. I gave it's on YouTube. I gave a description of what it is. And I spoke to the limitation of the parameters and where it's going. And I talked about the human brain and how many parameters it has, synapses and so on. And perhaps like an idiot, perhaps not, I said GPT-4, the next as it progresses. What I should have said is GPT-N or something.
I can't believe that this came from you.
But people should go to it. It's totally taken out of context. They didn't reference anything. They took it. This is what GPT-4 is going to be. And I feel horrible about it.
It doesn't. I don't think it matters in any serious way.
I mean, it's not good because, again, size is not everything, but also people just take a lot of these kinds of discussions out of context. But it is interesting to that's what I was trying to do, to compare in different ways the difference between the human brain and the neural network, and this thing is getting so impressive.
This is in some sense, someone said to me this morning, actually, and I was like, oh, this might be right. This is the most complex software object humanity has yet produced. And it will be trivial in a couple of decades, right? It'll be kind of anyone can do it, whatever. But yeah, the amount of complexity relative to anything we've done so far that goes into producing this one set of numbers is quite something.
Yeah, complexity including the entirety of the history of human civilization that built up all the different advancements of technology, that built up all the content, the data that GPT was trained on, that is on the internet. That it's the compression of all of humanity, of all of the, maybe not the experience.
All of the text output that humanity produces, which is somewhat different.
I mean, it's a good question. How much, if all you have is the internet data, how much can you reconstruct the magic of what it means to be human? I think we'd be surprised how much you can reconstruct. But you probably need a more better and better models. But on that topic, how much does size matter?
By number of parameters?
Number of parameters.
I think people got caught up in the parameter count race in the same way they got caught up in the gigahertz race of processors in the 90s and 2000s or whatever. You, I think, probably have no idea how many gigahertz the processor in your phone is. But what you care about is what the thing can do for you. And there's, different ways to accomplish that. You can bump up the clock speed. Sometimes that causes other problems. Sometimes it's not the best way to get gains. But I think what matters is getting the best performance. And, I think one thing that works well about OpenAI is we're pretty truth-seeking in just doing whatever is going to make the best performance, whether or not it's the most elegant solution. So I think like LLMs are a sort of hated result in parts of the field. Everybody wanted to come up with a more elegant way to get to generalized intelligence. And we have been willing to just keep doing what works and looks like it'll keep working.
So I've spoken with Noam Chomsky, who's been kind of one of the many people that are critical of large language models being able to achieve general intelligence, right? And so it's an interesting question that they've been able to achieve so much incredible stuff. Do you think it's possible that large language models really is the way we build AGI?
I think it's part of the way. I think we need other super important things.
This is philosophizing a little bit. Like what kind of components do you think, in a technical sense or a poetic sense, does it need to have a body that it can experience the world directly?
I don't think it needs that. But I wouldn't say any of this stuff with certainty. Like, we're deep into the unknown here. For me, a system that cannot go significantly add to the sum total of scientific knowledge we have access to, kind of discover, invent, whatever you want to call it, new fundamental science, is not a super intelligence. And to do that really well, I think we will need to expand on the GPT paradigm in pretty important ways that we're still missing ideas for. But I don't know what those ideas are. We're trying to find them.
I could argue sort of the opposite point, that you could have deep, big scientific breakthroughs with just the data that GPT is trained on. So like, I think some of it is like, if you prompt it correctly.
Look, if an oracle told me far from the future that GPT-10 turned out to be a true AGI somehow, maybe just some very small new ideas, I would be like, okay, I can believe that. Not what I would have expected sitting here, would have said a new big idea, but I can believe that.
This prompting chain, if you extend it very far and then increase at scale the number of those interactions, like what kind of, if these things start getting integrated into human society and starts building on top of each other, I mean, like, I don't think we understand what that looks like. Like you said, it's been 6 days.
The thing that I am so excited about with this is not that it's a system that kind of goes off and does its own thing, but that it's this tool that humans are using in this feedback loop. Helpful for us for a bunch of reasons. We get to, learn more about trajectories through multiple iterations. But I am excited about a world where AI is an extension of human will and a amplifier of our abilities, and this most useful tool yet created. And that is certainly how people are using it. And I mean, just look at Twitter, the results are amazing. People's self-reported happiness with getting to work with this are great. So yeah, maybe we never build AGI, but we just make humans super great. Still a huge win.
Yeah, I'm part of those people. Like the amount, I derive a lot of happiness from programming together with GPT. Part of it is a little bit of terror.
Can you say more about that?
There's a meme I saw today that everybody's freaking out about sort of GPT taking programmer jobs. No, it's the reality is just it's going to be taking, if it's going to take your job, it means you were a shitty programmer. There's some truth to that. Maybe there's some human element that's really fundamental to the creative act, to the act of genius that is in great design that is involved in programming. And maybe I'm just really impressed by all the boilerplate, but that I don't see as boilerplate, but is actually pretty boilerplate.
Yeah, it may be that you create in a day of programming, you have one really important idea.
Yeah. And that's the contribution.
That's the contribution. And there may be, I think we're going to find So I suspect that is happening with great programmers, and that GPT-like models are far away from that one thing, even though they're going to automate a lot of other programming. But again, most programmers have some sense of, anxiety about what the future is going to look like, but mostly they're like, this is amazing. I am 10 times more productive.
Yeah.
Don't ever take this away from me. There's not a lot of people that use it and say, like, turn this off,
Yeah. So I think, so to speak to the psychology of terror is more like, this is awesome. This is too awesome. I'm scared.
Awesome. Yeah. There is a little bit of
coffee tastes too good.
When Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, somebody said, and maybe it was him, that like chess is over now. Yeah. If an AI can beat a human at chess, then no one's going to bother to keep playing, right? Because like, what's the purpose of us or whatever? That was 30 years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. I believe that chess has never been more popular than it is right now. And people keep wanting to play and wanting to watch. And by the way, we don't watch two AIs play each other, which would be a far better game in some sense than whatever else. But that's not what we choose to do. Like, we are somehow much more interested in what humans do in this sense, and whether or not Magnus loses to that kid than what happens when two much, much better AIs play each other.
Well, actually, when two AIs play each other, it's not a better game by our definition of better.
Because we just can't understand it.
No, I think they just draw each other. I think the human flaws, and this might apply across the spectrum here, with AIs will make life way better, but we'll still want drama.
We will. That's for sure.
We'll still want imperfection and flaws, and AI will not have as much of that.
Look, I mean, I hate to sound like utopic tech bro here, but if you'll excuse me for 3 seconds, like the level of the increase in quality of life that AI can deliver is extraordinary. We can make the world amazing, and we can make people's lives amazing. We can cure diseases. We can increase material wealth. We can like help people be happier, more fulfilled, all of these sorts of things. And then people are like, oh, well, no one is going to work. But people want status. People want drama. People want new things. People want to create. People want to like feel useful. People want to do all these things, and we're just going to find new and different ways to do them, even in a vastly better, like unimaginably good standard of living world.
But that world, the positive trajectories with AI, that world is with an AI that's aligned with humans and doesn't hurt, doesn't limit, doesn't try to get rid of humans. And there's some folks who consider all the different problems with a super intelligent AI system. So one of them is Eliezer Yudkowsky. He warns that AI will likely kill all humans. And there's a bunch of different cases, but I think one way to summarize it is that it's almost impossible to keep AI aligned as it becomes super intelligent. Can you steel man the case for that? And to what degree do you disagree with that trajectory?
So first of all, I will say I think that there's some chance of that. And it's really important to acknowledge it, because if we don't talk about it, if we don't treat it as potentially real, we won't put enough effort into solving it. And I think we do have to discover new techniques to be able to solve it. I think a lot of the predictions, this is true for any new field, but a lot of the predictions about AI in terms of capabilities, in terms of what the safety challenges and the easy parts are going to be, have turned out to be wrong. The only way I know how to solve a problem like this is iterating our way through it, learning early, and limiting the number of one shot to get it right scenarios that we have. To steelman, well, I can't just pick like one AI safety case or AI alignment case, but I think Eliezer wrote a really great blog post. I think some of his work has been sort of somewhat difficult to follow, or had what I view as like quite significant logical flaws. But he wrote this one blog post outlining why he believed that alignment was such a hard problem, that I thought was, again, don't agree with a lot of it, but well-reasoned and thoughtful and very worth reading. So I think I'd point people to that as the steelman.
Yeah, and I'll also have a conversation with him. there is some aspect, and I'm torn here because it's difficult to reason about the exponential improvement of technology. But also, I've seen time and time again how transparent and iterative trying out, as you improve the technology, trying it out, releasing it, testing it, how that can improve your understanding of the technology in such that the philosophy of how to do, for example, safety of any kind of technology, but AI safety, gets adjusted over time rapidly.
A lot of the formative AI safety work was done before people even believed in deep learning, and certainly before people believed in large language models. And I don't think it's like updated enough given everything we've learned now and everything we will learn going forward. So I think it's got to be this very tight feedback loop. I think the theory does play a real role, of course, but continuing to learn what we learn from how the technology trajectory goes is quite important. I think now is a very good time, and we're trying to figure out how to do this, to significantly ramp up technical alignment work. I think we have new tools, we have new understanding, and there's a lot of work that's important to do that we can do now.
So one of the main concerns here is something called AI takeoff, or a fast takeoff, that the exponential improvement would be really fast to where...
Like in days.
In days, yeah. I mean, this is a pretty serious, or at least to me, it's become more of a serious concern, just how amazing ChatGPT turned out to be, and then the improvement in GPT-4.
Yeah.
Almost like to where it surprised everyone, seemingly, you can correct me, including you.
So GPT-4 has not surprised me at all in terms of reception there. ChatGPT surprised us a little bit, but I still was like advocating that we do it because I thought it was going to do really great.
Yeah.
So like, you know, maybe I thought it would have been like the 10th fastest growing product in history and not the number one fastest. Like, okay, you know, I think it's like hard. You should never kind of assume something's going to be like the most successful product launch ever. But we thought it was, or at least many of us thought it was going to be really good. GPT-4 has weirdly not been that much of an update for most people. You know, they're like, oh, it's better than 3.5, but I thought it was going to be better than 3.5, and it's cool, but, you know, this is like... Someone said to me over the weekend, you shipped an AGI, and I somehow, like, am just going about my daily life, and I'm not that impressed. And I obviously don't think we shipped an AGI, but I get the point, and the world is continuing on.
When you build, or somebody builds an artificial general intelligence, would that be fast or slow? Would we know it's happening or not? Would we go about our day on the weekend or not?
So I'll come back to the would we go about our day or not thing. I think there's like a bunch of interesting lessons from COVID and the UFO videos and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can talk to there. Yeah. But on the takeoff question, if we imagine a 2x2 matrix of short timelines till AGI starts, long timelines till AGI starts, slow takeoff, fast takeoff, do you have an instinct on what do you think the safest quadrant would be?
So the different options are like next year.
Yeah. Say the takeoff, we start the takeoff period.
Yep.
Next year or in 20 years.
20 years.
And then it takes 1 year or 10 years. Well, you can even say 1 year or 5 years, whatever you want for the takeoff.
I feel like now is safer.
So do I. So I'm in the
longer now.
I'm in the slow takeoff, short timelines is the most likely good world, and we optimize the company to have maximum impact in that world, to try to push for that kind of a world. And the decisions that we make are, you know, there's like probability masses, but weighted towards that. And I think I'm very afraid of the fast takeoffs. I think in the longer timelines, it's harder to have a slow takeoff. There's a bunch of other problems too. But that's what we're trying to do. Do you think GPT-4 is an AGI?
I think if it is, just like with the UFO videos, we wouldn't know immediately. I think it's actually hard to know that. I've been thinking, I've been playing with GPT-4 and thinking, how would I know if it's an AGI or not? Because I think In terms of, to put it in a different way, how much of AGI is the interface I have with the thing, and how much of it is the actual wisdom inside of it? Like, part of me thinks that you can have a model that's capable of super intelligence, and it just hasn't been quite unlocked. It's what I saw with ChatGPT, just doing that little bit of RL with human feedback makes the thing much more impressive, much more usable. So maybe if you have a few more tricks, like you said, there's like hundreds of tricks inside OpenAI, a few more tricks, and all of a sudden, holy shit, this thing.
So I think that GPT-4, although quite impressive, is definitely not an AGI. But isn't it remarkable we're having this debate?
Yeah. So what's your intuition why it's not?
I think we're getting into the phase where specific definitions of AGI really matter.
Yeah.
Or we just say, I know it when I see it, and I'm not even going to bother with the definition. But under the I know it when I see it, it doesn't feel that close to me. Like if I were reading a sci-fi book and there was a character that was an AGI and that character was GPT-4, I'd be like, well, this is a shitty book. Like, that's not very cool. Like I would have hoped we had done better.
To me, some of the human factors are important here. Do you think GPT-4 is conscious?
I think no, but
I asked GPT-4, and of course it says no.
Do you think GPT-4 is conscious?
I think it knows how to fake consciousness. Yes.
How to fake consciousness?
Yeah. If you provide the right interface and the right prompts.
It definitely can answer as if it were.
Yeah. And then it starts getting weird. It's like, what is the difference between pretending to be conscious and conscious?
I mean, look, you don't know, obviously. We can go to like the freshman year dorm late at Saturday night kind of thing. You don't know that you're not a GPT-4 rollout in some advanced simulation.
Yeah. Yes.
So if we're willing to go to that level, sure.
I live in that level. Well, but that's an important level. That's a really important level, because one of the things that makes it not conscious is declaring that it's a computer program, therefore it can't be conscious, so I'm not even going to acknowledge it. But that just puts it in the category of other. I believe AI can be conscious. So then the question is, what would it look like when it's conscious? What would it behave like? And it would probably say things like, first of all, I'm conscious. Second of all, display capability of suffering, an understanding of self, of having some memory of itself and maybe interactions with you. Maybe there's a personalization aspect to it. And I think all of those capabilities are interface capabilities, not fundamental aspects of the actual knowledge inside the neural net.
Maybe I can just share a few like disconnected thoughts here.
Sure.
But I'll tell you something that Ilya said to me once a long time ago that has like stuck in my head.
Ilya Sutskever.
Yes, my co-founder and the chief scientist of OpenAI and sort of legend in the field. We were talking about how you would know if a model were conscious or not. And I've heard many ideas thrown around, but he said one that I think is interesting. If you trained a model on a data set that you were extremely careful to have no mentions of consciousness or anything close to it in the training process, like not only was the word never there, but nothing about the sort of subjective experience of it or related concepts. And then you started talking to that model about, here are some things that you weren't trained about. And for most of them, the model was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But then you asked it, you sort of described the experience, the subjective experience of consciousness. And the model immediately responded, unlike the other questions, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. That would update me somewhat.
I don't know, because that's more in the space of facts versus like emotions.
I don't think consciousness is an emotion.
I think consciousness is the ability to sort of experience this world really deeply. There's a movie called Ex Machina.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it?
No.
The director, Alex Garland, who I had a conversation. So it's where AGI system is built, embodied in the body of a woman. And something he doesn't make explicit, but he said he put in the movie without describing why. But at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, when the AI escapes, the woman escapes, she smiles for nobody, for no audience. She smiles at at the freedom she's experiencing, I don't know, anthropomorphizing. But he said the smile to me was was passing the Turing test for consciousness, that you smile for no audience. You smile for yourself. It's an interesting thought. It's like you taking an experience for the experience's sake. I don't know. That seemed more like consciousness versus the ability to convince somebody else that you're conscious. And that feels more like a realm of emotion versus facts. But yes, if it knows...
Yeah. So I think there's many other tests like that we could look at too. But, my personal beliefs, consciousness is something very strange is going on. Let's say that.
Do you think it's attached to the particular medium of the human brain? Do you think an AI can be conscious?
I'm certainly willing to believe that consciousness is somehow the fundamental substrate and we're all just in the dream or the simulation or whatever. Yeah. I think it's interesting how much sort of the Silicon Valley religion of the simulation has gotten close to like Brahman and how little space there is between them. But from these very different directions. So like maybe that's what's going on. But if it is like physical reality as we understand it and all of the rules of the game are what we think they are, then there's something, I still think it's something very strange.
Just to linger on the alignment problem a little bit, maybe the control problem. What are the different ways you think AGI might go wrong that concern you? You said that fear, a little bit of fear is very appropriate here. You've been very transparent about being mostly excited, but also scared.
I think it's weird when people think it's like a big dunk that I say like I'm a little bit afraid. And I think it'd be crazy not to be a little bit afraid. And I empathize with people who are a lot afraid.
What do you think about that moment of a system becoming super intelligent? Do you think you would know?
The current worries that I have are that there are going to be disinformation problems or economic shocks or something else at a level far beyond anything we're prepared for. And that doesn't require super intelligence. That doesn't require a super deep alignment problem and the machine waking up and trying to deceive us. And I don't think that gets enough attention. I mean, it's starting to get more, I guess.
So these systems deployed at scale can shift the winds of geopolitics and so on.
How would we know if, like, on Twitter, we were mostly having, like, LLMs direct the whatever's flowing through that hive mind?
Yeah, on Twitter and then perhaps beyond.
And then as on Twitter, so everywhere else eventually.
Yeah, how would we know?
My statement is we wouldn't. And that's a real danger.
How do you prevent that danger?
I think there's a lot of things you can try. But at this point, it is a certainty. There are soon going to be a lot of capable open sourced LLMs with very few to no safety controls on them. And so you can try with regulatory approaches. You can try with using more powerful AIs to detect this stuff happening. I'd like us to start trying a lot of things very soon.
How do you, under this pressure that there's going to be a lot of open source, there's going to be a lot of large language models, under this pressure, how do you continue prioritizing safety? Versus, there's several pressures. So one of them is a market-driven pressure from other companies, Google, Apple, Meta, and smaller companies, how do you resist the pressure from that? Or how do you navigate that pressure?
You stick with what you believe in, you stick to your mission. I'm sure people will get ahead of us in all sorts of ways and take shortcuts we're not going to take. And we just aren't going to do that.
How do you outcompete them?
I think there's going to be many AGIs in the world, so we don't have to outcompete everyone. We're going to contribute one. Other people are going to contribute some. I think multiple AGIs in the world with some differences in how they're built and what they do and what they're focused on. I think that's good. We have a very unusual structure, so we don't have this incentive to capture unlimited value. I worry about the people who do, but hopefully it's all going to work out. But we're a weird org, and we're good at resisting pressure. We have been a misunderstood and badly mocked org for a long time. When we started, we announced the org at the end of 2015 and said we were going to work on AGI. People thought we were batshit insane.
Yeah.
I remember at the time a eminent AI scientist at a large industrial AI lab was DMing individual reporters being these people aren't very good and it's ridiculous to talk about AGI and I can't believe you're giving them time of day. And it's that was the level of pettiness and rancor in the field at a new group of people saying we're going to try to build AGI.
So OpenAI and DeepMind was a small collection of folks who were brave enough to talk about AGI in the face of mockery.
We don't get mocked as much now.
Don't get mocked as much now. So speaking about the structure of the org, so OpenAI went stopped being nonprofit or split up in 20. Can you describe that whole process?
Yeah.
How
So
things stand?
we started as a nonprofit. We learned early on that we were going to need far more capital than we were able to raise as a nonprofit. Our nonprofit is still fully in charge. There is a subsidiary capped profit so that our investors and employees can earn a certain fixed return. And then beyond that, everything else flows to the nonprofit. And the nonprofit is in voting control, lets us make a bunch of non-standard decisions, can cancel equity, can do a whole bunch of other things, can let us merge with another org, protects us from making decisions that are not in any shareholders' interest. So I think it's a structure that has been important to a lot of the decisions we've made.
What went into that decision process for taking a leap from nonprofit to capped for-profit? What are the pros and cons you were deciding at the time? I mean, this was 2019.
It was really to do what we needed to go do. We had tried and failed enough to raise the money as a nonprofit. We didn't see a path forward there. So we needed some of the benefits of capitalism, but not too much. I remember at the time someone said, as a nonprofit, not enough will happen. As a for-profit, too much will happen. So we need this sort of strange intermediate.